Today, I want to tell you about adeniums. For some flower growers, this plant seems to be very difficult to care for, while others can easily cope. I want to remind you that there is no magic here, only the right care, supported by the appropriate conditions. This is what we will talk about today. You can grow adeniums from seeds or buy a fairly mature plant on which a certain variety is grafted. Both seeds and grafted plants come mainly from nurseries in Thailand and other Asian countries. There are entire farms for their cultivation, and in nature adeniums grow in deserts, which has led to their nickname desert rose. Since it is a desert plant, not everyone's home can provide the right conditions for it to thrive. That's the secret, not the application of some miracle elixirs for the flower. And remember, with adenium cannot be treated as an ordinary plant. You need to follow certain rules. Do not plant, for example, in ordinary vegetable garden soil. Do not water as desired or feed it with anything. With this approach, it will not grow at your place. Many people ask for help and show pictures of a 3-year-old adenium that looks like a 3-month-old seedling. I think that many of you have seen something like this, but there is no need to worry. Now you will learn all the secrets of growing adenium, make the right conclusions, and take the right measures if you want, of course. And now I will tell you all the nuances in order without embellishments. Adenium soil. I want to start with the right soil. Soil is the main problem for beginners. Your task is to prepare a light, well-breathing, and therefore quickly drying soil. In such a soil, adenium will quickly build up roots and there will be no risk of their rotting. There are many variations of soils, but the simplest suitable composition looks like this. Buy in the store soil for cacti and succulents and add 40% perlite to loosen it. That's it, the simplest soil is ready. Why cannot plant adeniums in any other soil or in the garden soil? You ask, and I will answer, because such soils are too nutritious with a high nitrogen content. Soil for cacti and succulents is inherently poor, which is exactly what we need. We will feed the plant ourselves, selecting the right fertilizer at the right time. Let's continue. Lighting for adeniums. Adenium is a light-loving plant, as you have already realized. For residents of warm regions, this is not a problem at all. There is plenty of heat and light. If you want to successfully grow adenium, you need a lot of light. The more, the better. However, if you notice that he began to twist the leaves into a tube, then the amount of light should be reduced. This is a sign of overlighting. For lighting, it is best to use diode lights so it will be more economical and cheaper. Some even use small street spotlights for 30, 50, or 100 watts, depending on the number of plants and therefore the area to be illuminated. They are quite powerful with lots of lumens and penetrate the thick leaf plate of the adeniums perfectly. The color temperature marking on the lights should be 6,500,000, which is a cool white light. If you want to grow adeniums, you can't do without it. In warm regions and countries, nature gives you free light and saves you from this hassle. The main thing is not to forget to dim direct sunlight so that the foliage and caudex are not burned. The light should be bright but diffused. If the above nuances are not frightening, look further. Selecting a pot for the adenium. Here immediately remember, the pot should be small and tight, almost flush with the root system. If you plant in a large pot, then first, until the adenium grow roots and do not bump them into the walls of the pot, the above ground part will not begin to grow. This process can take a year, 2, or even 3. And secondly, you may not wait for this moment because it will rot before it grows roots. In a large pot, the soil dries out much more slowly because of the volume and small roots, which physically cannot absorb so much moisture. And by the way, for those who do not know what a caudex is, which I have already mentioned several times, it is the thickened base of the trunk. So, moving on. If it is time to renew the soil and transplant the plant, then you can transplant it into the same container if it has not yet become too small for it. Just replace the soil with fresh soil, because over time, the soil gets shallow. And since we talked about transplanting, I will say that adeniums love it. Therefore, do not be afraid to transplant them often. Before transplanting, you need to dry the soil and almost completely shake it off the roots, so it will be much easier. Transplanting can be done basically at any time of the year, except in late fall and winter, even if the plant is wintering in the warmth. Temperature of maintenance of adeniums. Let's move on to the next nuance, the temperature of keeping adeniums. These plants like warmth. In summer, they will be comfortable at a temperature from plus 23 to 35 degrees, but it is better not to allow temperatures above 35. At such high temperatures, it is very desirable that there was ventilation. You need to open windows or a jar. Now you know this. With such winterization, there are nuances in watering, but about this a little later. And the second variant of wintering in the warmth, the temperature during this period should not fall below plus 20 degrees. If the plant is on your windowsill, then put a thermometer next to the pot and make sure that the temperature does not fall below the specified value. If it's cooler, put a piece of styrofoam under the pot to insulate the pot from the cold windowsill, and the temperature in the pot will be about the same as in the room. Don't be too lazy to do this to avoid root rot. After all, it may seem that he is wintering in the warmth, but in fact he is not, and there's a chance to make mistakes when watering. Watering of Adenium. Now I will tell you about watering. This, by the way, is very important. Be sure to listen. Watering of Adenium is divided into two ways, taking into account the temperature of the content. Here you need to remember once and for all, when kept warm, the soil dries out faster. The warmer it is, the faster, and the roots in the heat work more actively, and in the cooler, drying is slower. Again, the cooler it is, the slower it is. Based on this, in the heat water the Adenium abundantly, well soaking the soil. You can even pour 2 or 3 times. The water should flow out of the drainage holes of the pot, so you get a guarantee that all the soil is soaked with water. After this, leave the Adenium alone until the soil has dried out almost completely, but do not allow it to dry out completely. When it has dried out, then you can water again in exactly the same way. The intervals between waterings will be different for everyone. It depends on the temperature, the looseness and composition of the soil, the air humidity, and so on. Therefore, there can be no watering schedule such as once a week or twice a week, orient only on the degree of drying of the soil in your conditions. But watering in the cool, when the temperature is about 15 degrees, is very different. In such a case, you need to switch to unshowering watering with a small amount of slightly warm water, about 35 degrees. After watering, the soil should dry out completely, especially if the Adenium drops its foliage. Then the moisture will simply have nothing to evaporate, and the roots will practically not absorb moisture. It is with cool winterization that most beginners have problems. Not everyone can accept the fact that their favorite flower will stand in dry soil. Overpower yourself if you don't want to put up with the fact that your Adeniums don't survive later. Adeniums are succulents, and they have a caudex of thickening at the base of the trunk. It stores water in the caudex and uses it during periods of drought. So don't worry, your flower won't dry out in dry soil, but excessive moisture and cooler temperatures can kill it. Some flower growers who have been growing Adeniums for a long time even practice a complete lack of watering when kept in the cool. Imagine, all winter they do not water them at all, and nothing bad happens to Adeniums. Yes, the caudex certainly shrivels at this, but when resuming watering, it takes the former shape and elasticity. This is what concerns watering. There is nothing to say about air humidity in principle. It does not matter when growing Adeniums. Adenium propagation. Well, now about how you can propagate Adenium. As I said at the beginning of the video, Adenium can be grown from seeds by an adult grafted with a specific variety of plant, and with the help of cuttings, how to grow it from seed. I will soon record a separate video, so subscribe to the channel not to miss it. If you are interested, you can buy an adult plant grafted with a specific variety from collectors. And the third way is from a cuttings. Yes, from a cuttings can grow Adenium, but only it will not be quite a full-fledged plant. It will not have a caudex, a thickening at the base of the trunk. Some flower growers love Adeniums just for the caudex, so if you are not particularly interested in it, a cuttings will do. It is not difficult to root it. It is best to do it in moist perlite. And if having a caudex is important to you, the best solution is to grow from seed. But keep in mind that growing from seed does not guarantee 100% of the variety, unfortunately. Seed suppliers estimate it at 60–70%, and in practice, it's as luck would have it. This, of course, is not a very convenient truth for seed sellers, so buying seeds of some variety of Adenium, you cannot be sure that this is the variety it will bloom with. The only way to get the desired variety is to buy a ready grafted plant. But this is where the cost factor comes in. Seeds are quite inexpensive, and even if they do not bloom according to the variety, you can easily get a completely new variety which does not yet exist in nature. And grafted Adeniums are relatively expensive. Therefore, if you want to get not one, but several different varieties, you will have to spend more money. Of course, you decide. Fertilizer for Adeniums. Well, Now about fertilizers. What and how often to feed to get a gorgeous plant, which will also bloom regularly. In short, without the right fertilizers, you will not grow anything sensible and certainly will not be able to achieve flowering. There are, of course, varieties that bloom more readily than others, but nevertheless, feed, and feed again. That's the key to success. And this is the very magic elixir about which many are silent and do not finish. But without this knowledge, you will not succeed. Let's consider in detail at least simple options of feedings. Feeding for adeniums should be varied. Remember this, taking into account the periods of growth and age. Begin to feed the adenium should begin from a month of age. True, the concentration of fertilizer should be 2 to 3 times less. As it grows up, the concentration gradually increases, and about 4 months of age, you need to bring it to the full amount. During this period, use nitrogen or all-purpose fertilizers with equal amounts of the macronutrients nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Organic fertilizers such as purchased manure, both liquid and in the form of biohumus granules and humates. Complex mineral fertilizers for cacti and succulents. Complex mineral fertilizers for flowering plants and fertilizers for flowering plants. These fertilizers should be alternated according to this scheme. The first week organics. Second week mineral fertilizers for cacti and succulents. Third week universal or nitrogen fertilizers. Fourth week fertilizers for flowering plants. Thus, they will receive a full complex of necessary elements. In principle, according to this scheme, you can feed adeniums up to 6 months of age. From 6 months onwards, reduce the amount of nitrogen and organic fertilizer and increase the amount of potassium phosphorus fertilizer. But continue to feed the same way every week. The scheme will be approximately as follows. The first week, potassium phosphorus fertilizers, the same for flowering. Second week, the same. Third week, universal fertilizers with an equal amount of macronutrients. Fourth week, potassium phosphorus fertilizer again. From about 8 months of age, you can feed once a month with potassium monophosphate, 1 gram per liter of water, but just note that such a feeding replaces 2 weeks of feeding with potassium phosphorus fertilizers. That is, after monophosphate, do not feed potassium phosphorus fertilizers for 2 weeks. From the age of 1 year, apply potassium monophosphate just once or twice a season, no more often. Difficult? For some, yes. For some, no. But if you follow this schedule and types of fertilization, you will be able to see your adenium in all its glory. Naturally, you will be able to admire and bloom, of course, if you observe all the other nuances of care. Just keep in mind that with such a frequency of fertilization, the soil will get greasy faster, so you will need to replant it more often in fresh soil. As I already said, you can transplant it into the same container if he did not grow out of it. Approximate frequency of transplanting every 2 to 3 months. Starting at the age of 1 year, switch to a feeding schedule of once every 10-14 days. From this age, you can feed only potassium phosphorus fertilizers for flowering plants, but necessarily with the presence of complex trace elements such as magnesium, boron, zinc, etc. They do not need to be transplanted so often. Once a year is enough. The poisonousness of the adenium. And a few words I want to say about the poisonousness of adenium. I often hear, I want to get an adenium, but the internet is full of information that it is poisonous. Is adenium poisonous? Yes, it is poisonous. Are 99% of all plants on Earth poisonous? Yes, it's poisonous too. To a greater or lesser degree, almost all plants, both outdoor and indoor, are poisonous, and this is their defense against destruction. If this defense were not in place, they would simply be eaten. There are, of course, especially poisonous plants that can cause harm even from simply touching them. But you won't just meet such plants and certainly never buy them anywhere. They are under control, many protected as rare or dangerous. The poisonousness of any plant does not need to be taken literally, but just know that they are not fit to eat. Their sap is poisonous if ingested in the stomach or on unprotected skin, especially if you are allergic to the plant. Therefore, all pruning manipulations should be carried out with gloves and then wash your hands with soap and water. This is quite enough to avoid any consequences. Also, if there are small children at home who like to eat flowers, then until they grow up or wean themselves from this, it is better to remove all flowers from the house at all. You can leave only completely non-poisonous, for example, chlorophytum. Animals are not affected because the juice of poisonous plants is very bitter, and having tasted it once, they try not to taste it again. Subscribe, give me a like, and stay tuned for more interesting videos. Your support means a lot to me.